Thomas, and this time we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to build a rocket out of scrap materials here. So when I scratch build rockets, often it's based upon something I've found that I can envision turning into a rocket. And so it could be an everyday object, it might be a particularly unusual nose cone. Today it's the scrap pieces left over from an Estes Alpha. I've been building several of these with my students in my rocketry class, so we have this leftover balsa. And so I'm going to use this as the basis for a set of fins. I've also got several leftover BT60 body tubes from other projects, so I'm going to incorporate those into this. But first I just want to look at the material here itself. Okay, so most of you are probably familiar with the rule of putting the grain of balsa fins along the leading edge. So my grain is running this way, which make this the leading edge. So theoretically I could kind of just snip this off in a couple of places and you have this very long, unusual looking fin. And here I've done this with a piece already. So if I just snip that off a little bit, I've got this really long piece that could be an unusual fin. The other half of that comes off here. And so in this case, the grain is moving like this. Okay, so I wouldn't want to use this as a root edge because that's going to give us a grain parallel to the root or very close to it and a not very strong fin. But I could, for example, put this on with this as the leading edge. Now, ignore the writing on there. It was some calculations I had to make for another project, and this scrap happened to be handy. Okay, now if I mount this like this against the rocket, the grain's not going quite parallel with this leading edge, but it's going to be close. And if I just clip this off and make this a very small fin, it's probably not going to be that big of a deal. Okay, I'm going to come back to the main one here though. If I do this entire fin like this, and let's see if I've just got a quick piece of tubing here. Here we go. Alright, so this is a piece of BT60 body tube. If this were the aft end and I put this on like this, it'll actually be a pretty stable rocket because our center of pressure is going to get moved way back toward the fins here, but I would be worried about snapping the fin simply because it's so long compared to our root edge. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean I can't do it, but we might want to also think about strengthening this. So I would probably do a paper lamination of this. Okay. Once I've got it into this form though, what we need to do next is put it into some simulation software where we can manipulate the variables and actually come up with a stable rocket. So to do this, the first thing I'm going to do is transfer this fin onto graph paper. And this is going to make putting this into Open Rocket easier. I'm just going to sand this a couple of times here to get rid of that nub that was left over there. We've also got a few nubs there. And I can just very quickly sand those. I don't want to sand any curve into this yet, or any type of taper. Okay, now I'm going to do this in Open Rocket simply because more people have access to it. RockSim is going to be very similar in terms of how we input this. Okay, so in the case of Open Rocket here, this corner is going to be my origin. Alright, so that's going to be 0 and 0. I like to work in metric because once you get used to it, you actually make fewer mistakes in it. So I'm just going to put this up where my root edge is right at the base of my x-axis here, and the very tip is on the y-axis. And now I'm just going to go through and trace this. Alright, so there I have an outline of my fin. Using the other piece that was left from this, I'm also going to do a fin made out of this thing here. And again, I'm just going to scrape off a few of those little nubs. Alright, now it is tempting to use this whole thing as a fin. Okay, so let's assume I do. And again, once I get this into simulation software, I may decide it's not such a great idea. We can start with it. So once again, I just flip my graph paper around here so I can use the same sheet. Alright, here's our origin. Okay, and once again, I'm just going to trace around this. Okay, so I've got two pieces now, and one possibility here is I could use two of the long ones and then have two of the smaller ones here and have those oppose each other, so you'd have two long fins sticking out this way, and then top and bottom you have the other two fins. Okay, or perhaps we could do 3 or 4 of these fins around the rocket, and then further up the rocket or at the same attachment, we could have 3 or 4 of these offset. Okay, so for example, here, all right, we could have a fin looking like that coming off, and then also a fin like that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and transfer these into OpenRocket so we've got a better idea of what we're playing with. Before we transfer this into OpenRocket, you'll find it easier if you go through first of all and find the coordinates for each point, each vertex along the fin here, and then we'll enter those numbers into OpenRocket, which will then duplicate the fin. Okay, so I've done it for both fins here. This one I just used the same sheet of paper flipped around. Okay, this graph paper is in 1 centimeter grids with 1 millimeter subgrids here. And so I can set up my OpenRocket to do metric system, and I can directly plug these numbers in. Alright, so here I've just put in a couple of generic pieces here to get started. So I put on a BT60 body tube that's 18 inches long and a nose that fits it. Now these may not be what we ultimately use, but to get down to the fins, we need to have at least a nose and a body tube in place. So here you can see I have already put in one of the 2 sets of fins here. And if we look at this from the back, right, I have 2 of them. And my intention is then to put the other 2 at 90-degree angles there. Okay, so if I click on these, you can see what it looks like here. All right, so this is how I entered the coordinates in from my graphs onto OpenRocket here and got this design. Okay, so over here in the table, this is just all of those vertices perhaps, at each angle there. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing with you along with me here for the other fin type. So I'm just going to move out of that and go up here to body tube. We're going to put in another set of freeform fins. All right, 2 of those, and we are going to rotate those by 90 degrees. All right, so we'll go over here to shape. I'm going to go through, and this column goes from the origin and then moves in a clockwise direction all the way around here. So first of all, we're going to put in a little tiny tip that it had there. And all right, and then it goes back around. So that's looking like it's supposed to. Okay, so now I'm going to come over here to Appearance, and I'm going to change my 3D color here. I'm going to call it yellow. Okay, you can make yours whatever you want. Okay, and then coming back to General here, first of all, we want a top view now, so we're seeing these fins over here. All right, I'm going to adjust the slider here so that they are right there at the base. Okay, my material is balsa, and it is 0.3 centimeters, the eighth of an inch. All right, we'll go ahead and round our fins. 3D view then. Okay, so I've just arbitrarily put on a red rocket, and now it's got one set of fins that's yellow, one that's black, and an aqua colored nose cone there. All right, after allowing this idea to ferment overnight, I decided to come back and remove one of the sets of fins and keep the smaller sets, and then increase that fin number to 3. So that now it looks like this. A few changes to the body tube here. This is a 16-inch body tube, and instead of 18, so it's a little bit shorter. And then the upper body tube is at 14.3 centimeters. So I just modified that as well. And then I found that I had an assembled but uninstalled ejection baffle in my junk parts box. So I'm going to use that as well. Okay. And now as we go along, I may decide I'm going to put a 24 millimeter motor mount back here. I'm going to have to find out if I have the proper centering rings and tubes. But otherwise, I'm going to go from here and back into the lab and start building this. So back to the building materials here. This will be our main body tube. This is one I was using to demonstrate how to put vinyl coverings on, and so I'm just going to use this with the vinyl intact. As I said, we found a ejection baffle here, and it's got a considerable length of shock cord already installed on it. And then I've got a motor mount here, some centering rings, a motor clip, and of course the funny looking balsa that we're going to use as fins. Okay, so I'm going to clear this kind of out of the way here. I'm going to work on the fins first, so I get them sanded and add some sanding sealer to them. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just cut out the part that we want here. And I may still use the other part for another rocket. Okay, and then the same thing here. Actually, I think I'll use this one. It's got a similar grain. Alright, I'm going to stack these all together. Oh, there's a little bit of a difference here. I had not noticed that before. Okay, so some of these actually have a little dip down here, so a little bit more balsa, and some do not. think what I'm going to do here is use this one as a template. Alright, so if we use this vertex and this vertex, then we can just come in here and cut straight down through all of them. Okay, and then here in the back, just do it this way and use it as a template to cut off that extra balsa. The rest of the shape looks pretty good. There might be a little bit of change there in the back, and we can deal with that. Okay, we've got a little bit of discrepancy here on the ends, but we can sand that off. And so initially here, I'm just going to take some 100 grit sandpaper, and we're just going to even up the edges here. Alright, and then we can even up those aft edges just by sanding them down. Okay, and do make sure that you go back every so often and check that they haven't slipped very much. Alright, now we're going to put together the motor mount. And so first of all, I'm going to measure 65 millimeters or 6.5 centimeters here from the bottom. Okay, and then I'm just going to cut a little slit in there. Okay, and then I'm going to add a little bit of glue from the bottom. Actually, I'm going to put it on the top. I'm just going to put it down below that cut line. Alright, and then we'll put in the engine block. Now I've got this spacer left over from another model I can use to push that up through the glue and in. And if I've done all this right, this should poke right into there. Okay, looks like we've got just a little bit off. Alright, so that's going to go in like that. And then for my motor mount rings, I'm going to put it in like that. And I'm going to give myself, say, 25 millimeters here. For that aft ring. Okay, and I'm just going to take a little bit of glue here, put it just above that area, and slide that down to my mark. Okay, and try and get that all as perpendicular as possible. And then the forward ring is going to rest right on top of the engine clip there. So I'm going to put my glue right above that. And in a similar fashion, just go ahead and put that on and have it end up right on the clip there. And it's a little bit loose, so I'm going to go ahead and put some more glue on as a fillet. Smooth that around. Alright, now we're going to make sure both of those are fairly aligned. And I'm going to set that aside to dry. I'm going to treat my fins with a polyurethane based sanding sealer. And the first thing I'm going to do here is just poke a long straight pin into the ends of these. Alright, then I'm just going to open this up. And I'm going to use a cotton applicator. You can use a paintbrush if you like. Alright, I'm just going to put this all over and let it fill in the grain. Okay, and don't forget to do the edges, although you'll want to leave the root edge untreated. We want it to be nice and porous for the glue. Alright, and then I'm just going to put this into a corrugated cardboard edge here to dry. And this stuff usually takes about an hour to dry to the point where you can sand it. And then I'm going to do the other two fins off camera and then come back. While I'm waiting for glue and sanding sealer to dry, I'm going to go ahead and mark my tube here for the fins. So I'm using this fin marking guide by Estes, and it just simply has little platforms here that various tubes can go on. And okay, you probably get a good view there. So I'm going to use the 3 fin marks here. So I'm going to put a tick mark there, one behind, and then I have an additional guide here. And I'm going to run a line from my little tick marks about halfway up the tube, just so I've got a good sight line. Okay, and I'm going to attach my launch lug right to the root edge of one of the fins in the corner, so I'm not going to put on an extra launch lug line. Alright, so have to wait for fins yet for the rest of the fin mounting there. For the ejection baffle there, we can go ahead and install that. And so I'm going to make this, so I want my vinyl here to have the rounded edges facing downward. So this is going to go up inside. So I need to string my shock cord there through the tube. Okay, and I need to find the middle of this. It doesn't look like I've done it before. Okay, so we're just over 5 centimeters. We'll call it 25 right there. 25 millimeters. And now I just need to take some glue here. Alright, now normally I would put it inside the tube, but I don't want the shock cord to get into the glue. So I'm going to put the glue on the coupler first. Alright, and then you can just push that in until I get to my mark there. And then wipe off the excess. And I'm trying to do this without getting it all over the vinyl there. Okay, so that piece can dry. While I'm still waiting for glue and more glue and sanding sealer to dry, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the nose cone here. This is a Rocketarium nose cone, and most of their noses have two seams along the sides here, and then it becomes a matter of preference as to how much you want to worry about trying to sand those down or fill them in. So I'm going to start off with some 150 grit sandpaper to knock down those seams. And now I'm going to switch to 220 grit to smooth that out. And then once I've done the seams, I'm going to go all the way around the nose cone. And that will help the paint adhere better. Alright, now I'm going to wipe this down with a little bit of alcohol. Get the sanding dust off and show me how much it's scratched. Okay, so you can still see some of the seam there, and if you want you can fill that in with plastic model putty and then sand that down. I think I'm going to use some filling primer, which will do kind of the same thing there. So I'm going to take this over to the fume hood to paint that, and then when I get back we should be about ready to put the motor mount in. My motor mount is dry enough to handle and install here, and what I want to do is end up with it being flush with the aft end of the body tube. And so I'm going to put 2 rings of glue in instead of just trying to shove this through. So if I measure this kind of right about to there and put my thumb on there, I want the glue to be just below where that ring is going to sit. And now I can take my glue and I'm going to insert this without touching the sides until I hit my thumbnail there, and then I'm just going to smear that around the inside. I'll probably need to do that more than once. Okay, and now I'm going to partially insert this. And normally I try to get my launch lug and my engine clip on the same line. Since my launch lug is going to be right next to a fin, I'm just going to line this up with a fin. Alright, and now I'm going to also put a bead of glue just inside the body tube, and that will glue the aft ring on. Come on, stay in there. Okay, and now I can go ahead and just insert this in. Alright, a little sticky there, come on. Okay. So now it looks like that. And just clean off the excess glue. And once again, we're going to wait for glue to dry. Alright, at this point the fins have had 2 coats of sanding sealer and have been sanded once. And so I'm going to give them their final sanding here. So once again, I'm going to sand off the excess sanding sealer here. Now, because these are kind of long and spindly, I think I'm going to forego trying to put in an airfoil here. A little bit of buildup of sanding sealer there. So I'm just going to give it a square cross section. It's not going to obtain any altitude records, but it will give it a little bit more strength. So here I'm just going to go ahead and sand off the excess sanding sealer on the edges as well. Okay, so I'm going to do that to the other two fins off camera, and then I'll come back. I have all three fins sanded, and we're almost ready to put these on, but I just noticed that I did not include a launch lug line. So I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to pick a spot in between these two fin lines here. Just get a rough guesstimate. Okay, and I'll go ahead and put that back on my tube marking guide. Now I'm going to put a line all the way down the length. Now, the last time I was looking at how to put the fins on, I was thinking I'd put them on like this so that the tips would be even with the aft end of the body tube. And the idea there was to help protect the fins from possibly snapping off. But the more I think about it, I think I'm going to put them on like this so that when the rocket's on display it will stand upright without the engine clip getting in the way. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is just use this as a guide to measure where that's going to be. Just going to put a little mark here for each one. Okay. And then for my launch lug, I'm going to put one launch lug down here flush with the aft end. The other launch lug I'm going to put up here at about 25 centimeters from the aft end. So that's going to go there. Okay, and even though this is going to be a somewhat tall rocket, it's not going to be very heavy, so I could probably get away with using 1/8 inch launch lugs on that. Okay, so here I'm going to take a little bit of sandpaper and just roughen the area here where the fins will go. Doesn't require a lot, just to take the gloss off. And this will help the fins hold on better. Okay, I'm going to put a little down here and a little bit up here for the two launch lugs. Okay, then we've got another fin. And the last fin. Alright, from here this is going to be like just about any other rocket. So I am going to take some wood glue here. You could use white glue if you wanted to. Alright, I'm just going to put a nice even bead of glue here. Alright, and here we don't want too much Too much glue actually takes longer to set up. Okay, and then I'm going to take this fin, I'm going to touch it down here, pull that back off, and I'm going to let this get tacky for about a minute and then come back and put the fin back on. My glue has become a little bit tacky, so now I'm going to put this back on. Apparently not quite tacky enough. Alright, so looking down, this should be straight along the line and should be perpendicular in relation to the tube. Okay, and now this can dry in an upright position, and I would let it go for at least 15 minutes before you attempt another fin, and then just keep going to the next fin and the third fin there. And then I'm going to do that part off camera, and then we'll come back to do the launch lug. Okay, so while the glue is drying on the fins back in the lab, I've come into OpenRocket to update the fin placement and the launch lugs here. So I've moved the fins back so that now they stick past the aft end of the rocket. I've added the two launch lugs here and here. Okay, my stability is still really good. And if we go over here to flight simulations, this flies really nicely on a wide variety of motors from a B4 up to a D24. So everything's still looking good here. On the finishing, all right, this is kind of the base finish here. So the green is actually that vinyl sheet that I showed earlier during the initial stages of the build. It'll have a base coat of black, but then overcoating that will be a color shifting paint that has green overtones to it, and that will kind of blend in then with the vinyl here. So everything with the changes still looks good, and with that I'm going to go back and take a look at how the fins are doing. The fins are dry enough to work with, and so now I'm going to attach the launch lugs. So here we're just going to add a little bit of glue once more. Alright, and then the first of these again is going to go right here at the aft end. And then just use the line and the rocket itself to make sure that everything is lined up straight. Okay, that one looks pretty good. And then we'll just repeat the same thing on the forward launch lug. Alright, that one's going to go right here. Okay, and the same way we'll look down on it to begin with. Okay, and then I'm going to sight through both of them and along the line. Okay, and so those look good, and once again we'll let this glue dry and then come back. The glue has dried on my fins and on the launch lugs, and so now I'm going to get a little bit of tissue ready here and my glue, and we'll go ahead and put in the fillets. Okay, I like to do facing fins at the same time. You don't have to. I'm just going to run a bead of glue down each fin and then use a finger here to smooth that in. Do that on both sides. Alright, and as long as you keep the rocket horizontal so the glue doesn't run, you can go ahead and just move on to the next face and so on all the way around. Okay, and then do the same thing for the launch lugs. Okay. Now I'm going to let this dry in a horizontal position, and when it's completely dry, we can start the paint. The fillets are dry on the main part of the rocket now, and it is currently being primed for painting. This is the nose cone that I painted earlier, and so this started out with a coat of gloss black enamel, and then that was overcoated with color shifting paint that Rust-Oleum makes. Currently, what they have available in my area at least is this blue-green one, and then they also have kind of a purple-pink one as well. But this is kind of neat because depending on which color you, or which angle you look at it, it has different colors to it. And so I think this is going to be really nice looking when we get the entire body done in this as well. So as we get stuff painted, I'll show the steps as we move along, and then we'll put the whole thing together. Okay, here's the main part of the rocket. I've got the base coat on, so this is all gloss black. Hey, you notice that I do have some grain showing up there, and that's simply because I didn't do any sanding sealer here. Alright, and so now what I'm going to do is overcoat with some color shifting paint to match what I used on the nose cone. Okay, here I've applied the color shift coat to it. You can use this in multiple coats and get a deeper or a shallower effect. This is with 2 coats, and it looks pretty good. I think I like it the way it is. So I'm going to let this completely dry, and then we'll be able to assemble the entire rocket. Now while the paint is drying on the body tube, we can do the final assembly of the recovery system here. So we've got this part which has our coupler and baffle in there, and we already hooked up the shock cord to the baffle, so that's down inside there. Now one of the things I want to do is I'm going to put some zipper preventative here. So one of the problems with the Kevlar shock cords is they do have no stretch, and if they come backward with enough force, they can zipper the body tube. And so we can spread that force out a little bit by making a bumper out of masking tape here. And so I'm just going to fold this over itself a few times. And we'll shift it downward here in just a moment. So that needs to come over like that. Okay. And what I'm trying to do is trap it with some material on either side. And then I can scoot this down before I put the final pressure on it. I'm lucky. There we go. Okay, so that when it's in place, about half the masking tape is sticking up there, and I can crimp that down really well. Alright, now I've also got a little bit of vinyl poking out here, so I'm just going to trim that off with my hobby knife. Just make sure you got a nice fresh blade to do this. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to attach this to the nose cone so I can remove all this tape from it. And now with the tape removed, I'll just tie on the other end of my shock cord here using a double knot or 2 half hitches. Okay, just tie that down really well. You'll want to cut off this so that it can't get up in between the shoulder of the nose cone and the body tube. And I'm going to move it over here. It's also a good idea to put just a little touch of super glue on the knot, and that'll keep it from unraveling. Okay, doesn't take much, just a little touch there. Alright, I'm going to let that dry for just a moment, and then we'll put the parachute on. Here I have a 15-inch parachute. This is from R.E.A.R. And if you've seen any of my videos, you know that I like to use snap swivels here. So I'm going to take all my loops on one finger and just adjust those until all the corners down here are about the same spot. Alright, and then while I hold on to the loops, I'm going to take all those loops and pass them through the swivel side of the snap swivel. And this is a fairly big one, not because of the load, but because of the size of the eyelet on the nose cone. Alright, so I'm going to pull that down onto a knot, make sure I'm still even here, and I am. Okay, so when you got that where you want it, we'll just touch a little bit of wood glue or white glue there. It's way more than I need. Okay, and just work that down into that knot. Just like that. And then this will clip on here. And this is why we need such a big snap on this, is because it's a fairly thick eyelet there. And so this needs to be able to move free. Okay, so that's all together. And now, for the moment, I'm just going to fold this up. Alright, so I'll just draw this up into the triangle. Fold that over a couple of times. And then my shock cord can go down inside the upper body tube here. Okay, we'll just stuff that guy down in here for now. When I actually go to launch it, I won't quite pack it in the same way. Just like that. Okay. So there's our upper section, and we're just waiting for the paint to dry on the lower section, and then we'll glue this in and we'll be done. Okay, the main body tube is dry enough that we can put everything together. Probably not dry enough that I want to launch it yet, but here I'm just going to put a bead of glue right inside the body tube. Okay, and then we're just going to take the upper body tube here and just rotate that into place. Okay, make sure it seats itself well. And I'm going to line up my vinyl seam here with the launch lug. Okay, and that is it. So this rocket is completely done. You can see the cool color shifting there. Maybe this will inspire you to make your own rocket, if not this exact one. Have a great flight and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.